getting back to the Cardinals' 34-13 loss to the Green Bay Packers yesterday, I think it's only fair to give out blame or credit in the case of a victory each and every week. So some weeks we'll be giving out some victory pie. There are other weeks like this week where it will be the blame pie to see who is most at fault for what happened in this game yesterday. And I have, let me just see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people are a part of the blame pie this week for the Arizona Cardinals in their Week 6 loss to the Green Bay Packers. And we'll start with the person who I believe has the majority of the blame for this game yesterday. And I would ask the audience here in the studio to make sure that my math adds up to 100% here, because I did it early this morning and I'm not necessarily sure if this adds up to 100. So when we get there, please make sure that it adds up to 100%. But 50% of the blame, the lion's share of the blame for yesterday's loss to the Green Bay Packers, I believe lies squarely with Jonathan Gannon, the head coach. And the reason why is the head coach of a football team is the person that holds the team accountable. He is the person that sets the tone. He is the person that is involved in game planning, even though he's maybe not necessarily calling the plays on either side of the ball. They are the person that sets the tone, sets the message, sets the mantra, and holds the team accountable. They are the CEO of the team. And I've watched a team now 3 times in short order get off to slow starts. And yeah, they were able to get away with one last week against the 49ers. They were able to come back in that game, but they are not going to be able to make a living playing that way. They cannot hand opponents big multi-touchdown leads, multi-score leads. They were down 14 at halftime yesterday, and only because they were able to put together a small drive there at the end to kick a field goal and then started the second half with the ball. So when this happens week after week after week, and it's not just an isolated incident, when this isn't just a one-off because maybe you had some long travel or the other team's coming off of a bye or whatever one-off excuse I can come up with, when those don't apply, when it is a multi-week thing, then we get to a place where the blame has to go on the head coach. And that's where the blame, I think the majority of it lies. And he would tell you that. He would tell you it starts with us as coaches. It starts with me as the head coach. That's who deserves the criticism, who deserves the blame. Well, I'm going to give it to you, Jonathan Gannon. You are 50% of the blame for the way that this team was unprepared and has gotten off to a 3rd consecutive slow start. 25% of the blame. So now we're at 75%. 75% of the blame lies with these 2 people. And that would be Drew Petzing, the offensive coordinator for this Arizona Cardinals team. You have to find a way to make an adjustment in game. When this team was able to find success in the second half, they were doing so by getting Trey McBride involved in the offense. And then once that started to work, and once they were able to have some big chunk plays, they then immediately went back to running the football with an ineffective James Conner. He was banged up. He was hurt. He was not at 100%. And yet, because that's the identity of the team, because that's the mantra that this team lives by philosophically, they all roads lead back to James Conner. And when James Conner is healthy and this offense is at peak performance, yes, all roads lead through James Conner. But there are weeks where that's not going to be the case. There are weeks where you're going to have to find other ways to keep your offense ahead of schedule. You're going to have to find other ways to get your offense into flow. Because if you're going to have 3 and outs on your first 4 drives, you are going to always be trailing at halftime. And I don't trust this coaching staff. I don't trust the personnel right now to be able to dig themselves out of that mess. And they're 2-4. They're a flawed team right now. And Drew Petzing has to share some of that responsibility for these slow starts offensively, for these early 3 and outs. They had back-to-back 3 and outs in the game yesterday. And they had maybe it was their second or their third drive was a 5-play drive, so they picked up 1 first down. But 3 of their first 4 drives were 3 and outs. You can't hand the opposition those types of opportunities. You can't hand the opposition the time of possession battle. Not on the road, not in Green Bay, not against that team, not against that coaching staff. You can't do it. You'll get out coached, you'll get out schemed, you'll get out manned, you'll get outworked, you'll get outscored. And that's what happened yesterday. So 25% of the blame going to Drew Petzing. 10% of the blame going to go to the general manager, Monty Ossenfort. Because this defense is unfixable right now. There is not a single thing that this organization can do to fix the issues that they have defensively in terms of getting after the quarterback. Yes, they will get Darius Robinson back, and that will help. That will make them a more potent group. But it's not a cure-all. It's not the magic elixir. It is not the thing that's going to immediately push them to being a top 5 defense in this league. They are a ways away from being the team that they need to be defensively. And it's not a coaching problem. The scheme's not the problem. It's a personnel issue. There is so much work that needed to be done with this group this past offseason, and the money that Monty Ossenfort spent didn't go to the right places. It went to the interior of the defensive line to help shore up stopping the run, but they didn't address pass rush and getting after the quarterback. The money they spent in the secondary with corner Sean Murphy Bunting is probably money they'd like to have back. It was a misallocation of resources. And so while he's not the one coaching the team up, he's not the one calling the plays, there's not a whole lot he is doing right now because it is in the middle of the season. 10% of the blame for yesterday is going to go to Monty Ossenfort. This next one's controversial. I'm aware of it. 10% of the blame is going to Marvin Harrison Jr. Leaves the game with the concussion. That's not the reason he's getting the 10%. The reason he is getting 10% of the blame, and it goes back to why Drew Petzing has 25% of the blame. With Marvin Harrison Jr.'s presence on this roster, it feels as if they force everything through number 18. And when you do that, it stops Michael Wilson from being able to be involved. It stops Trey McBride from being able to be involved. It stops your entire offense from finding a flow. And so this is not necessarily all on Marvin Harrison Jr., but his presence on this team, because of the prospect that he is, because the superstar that people think he can be, he just sucks a lot of the life out of the room. He requires so much attention from an offensive game plan perspective that I think at times the coaching staff overdoes it. You saw the course correction from his first game where he only had, the one catch for 4 yards? The second game, it was, we're just going to force feed Marvin. We're going to force feed him. And when you do that, you keep yourself from finding a flow. And you have other weapons on this team. That's not to say I don't want Marvin Harrison Jr. involved and being the leading target getter on this team. He is a star. He is somebody that can be a game changer, a game wrecker for this offense. But so can Trey McBride. Trey McBride showed last year when there wasn't a Marvin Harrison Jr. on this team an ability to change the way the games went for the Arizona Cardinals. He created mismatches defensively. He put other opposing defensive coordinators in a box, in a bind. And he had a lot of success in the second half with Kyler Murray, and that relationship grew as the year went on. And yet here we are. The only time yesterday that it was able to kind of break through and look like it did a year ago was when Marvin Harrison Jr. was out of the game with a concussion. And again, that's not on Marvin himself. It's just on what his presence does to the room. And so he's going to get 10% of the blame. Now, my math tells me 50, 25, 10, and 10. I've got 5% left. So that 5% that I have left, and no one has told me my math is wrong, so I believe I still have the 5% left, is going to go to Kyler Murray. And not because Kyler Murray played bad yesterday, but because Kyler Murray didn't play great yesterday. And this is the rub with Kyler Murray as the quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals. You don't see enough to completely buy in, but you see enough to not want to sell. And in a game like yesterday's, it was the perfect platform, the perfect opportunity for Kyler Murray to be the quarterback that lifts his teammates, that makes his teammates better. And I don't know if Kyler Murray is that type of quarterback. And if we are still asking that question in year 6 of this operation, then that's probably the answer. We have our answer by not having an answer. And so Kyler Murray didn't play bad. He didn't make any unforced errors. He didn't throw any brutal interceptions. He didn't throw a poorly timed pick six that changed the complexity of the game. He didn't do any of that. But he didn't, as the quarterback, as the leader, as the orchestrator of this offense, he did not lift up the teammates around him. And look, I can go chapter and verse across the National Football League of quarterbacks who lift up the players around them. You don't think Josh Allen, who's playing tonight in Monday Night Football, lifts the players around him? Absolutely does. Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love. Look at the supporting cast that Jordan Love has. 2 years ago, none of those guys would be fantasy relevant. None of those guys would be players that you'd be paying attention to. But you are, because Jordan Love elevates those players because of how good Jordan Love is. Kyler Murray doesn't do that on a regular enough basis for this team. You see it in flashes. That's where it keeps you from selling. It keeps you from wanting to hop off the experience. But you don't see enough of the excellence that warrants thinking that Kyler Murray can take you into the next chapter. And that next chapter is making the playoffs and making deep postseason runs and competing for NFC championships and trying to break through and win a Super Bowl. Does anybody feel right now with what they've seen through the first 6 years of Kyler Murray's career, including this 6-game sample that we have this year, that he's the guy that's going to lead this team to the promised land? That's the problem. And if you're going to say that the answer is, I don't know, that's your answer. You've got your answer right there. So 50% to Jonathan Gannon for having the team just completely unprepared and off to another slow start. And I'm not going to give him any excuses. It's the third time it's happened already this year. So 50% of the time, they've put themselves behind the eight ball at halftime. And there was one game, I think it was the Lions game, where it was 7-7 at halftime. So that doesn't even count. Didn't even have a lead in that game. It's probably the Washington game. And in the Buffalo game, they had to have second half miracles to start the year. So this is a recurring theme, and that falls on the coach. When it happens more than once, when it is a recurring issue, that falls on the head coach. Look, the New York Jets, who are playing tonight on Monday Night Football, fired their head coach for this exact reason, because the team was constantly getting off to slow starts and was constantly unprepared and was constantly having performances of 13 penalties for 100 yards. Got Robert Saleh fired in New York. Not to say Jonathan Gannon's going to get fired or should get fired, but those are the things that when they begin to stack become a problem. So 50% of the blame going to Jonathan Gannon, 25% of the blame going to Drew Petzing for this offense being stuck in mud at times, for this offense not being able to get out of first gear in the early going. In the modern NFL, you should not have 3 of your first 4 drives being 3 and outs. You can't have it. We are not going to mistake the Arizona Cardinals for a top 5 offensive talent team in the National Football League. But they don't have nobodies. Kyler Murray's not a nobody. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not a nobody. James Conner, Trey McBride, these are not nobodies. They have an offensive line that is good enough to protect. There should be easy ways to get this offense into flow. Because we've seen this team against the Bills, against the 49ers last week. They showed it a little bit this week against Green Bay. They can go through phases where they very much look like the better team. Their defense buckled down in the second half and gave them a chance. They just couldn't execute. They turned the ball over too much. If you could just clean up a little bit of these slow starts, we would be talking about a much different team through 6 games. They went into this week. Think about all the negativity I've just put out in the first hour of the show about this team. They went into this week. If they won, they would have been statistically tied for first place in the NFC West. That was what was in front of them. That was what coming back last week against the 49ers opened up for them. And then they put this performance together, which showed you that last week was a fluke. That ability to come back is not sustainable. They're not good enough to do that. They're talented enough to win football games, but they have to play the game on their terms. They have to play the game in their script. Because we've seen when the script doesn't go their way, it goes sideways. There is no ability to adjust. And we'll talk a little bit in hour number 2 about Drew Petzing, because I've seen the Twitter noise. I've seen the social media noise that they want somebody new calling plays for the Arizona Cardinals on offense. They want Drew Petzing out the door. Pack your bags. Get out of town. And he was part of the blame tree today. He got a part of the blame. but not the lion's share of the blame. He's not the reason the team is hopefully unprepared. He's not the reason that the team is undermanned defensively. That's a Monty Ossenfort problem. And I know everybody loves Monty and they love the social media videos of how good he is in the draft room and how good he is at talking to other GMs and he's wheeling and dealing and look, it's Trey Benson, what a steal he was in the third round, and Darius Robinson, Marvin Harrison, what a great job by Monty Ossenfort. Yes, Monty is very good on draft night, and you want somebody like that as your general manager. You want somebody who can make those shrewd moves, who is calm under pressure, who can thrive in those types of environments. I want that as my GM. But we also need to recognize that this offseason for Monty Ossenfort was a huge opportunity. A lot of money was available to him, and that money was not allocated correctly. Injuries haven't helped, but this team is completely undermanned defensively. And none of their issues were mysteries in the offseason. All of these issues were known in the offseason. We knew at the end of last year, this team couldn't get after the quarterback. They can't pressure the opposing QB. And yet, here we are again, week 6, talking about a 2-4 football team that can't get after the quarterback. Hopefully, Darius Robinson comes back and he's a stud, because they're going to need him to be, or else this is going to slide off the rails in a hurry. And so that's why we're giving some of the blame to Monty Ossenfort. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Monty Ossenfort's 10%, we're just going to leave that there for the remainder of the season. He's probably going to get that every week, depending on how the games go. He might not get it during the victory tree that we give out, if we give out some praise for being victorious. But certainly when things go wrong, he's more than likely going to have the nice little 10% carved out for himself. We'll just call that Monty's corner. He'll just have that every week. I've only got 90% to work with because Monty's going to get 10%. That's almost a guarantee. And Kyler Murray has to play better. And at some point, I don't know if it'll be next week. I don't know if it'll be 3 weeks from now. At some point, we're going to have the conversation here on the show of, is it time to end this experiment? Is it time to move on? Is it time to start thinking about who you can get in free agency, who you can get in the draft? There might be that conversation. That conversation might have to happen in the next couple of weeks, because the longer you go not knowing is the more you have been told that he's not the answer. And so, again, he was not bad yesterday. It's why he was the last guy on the list. He only got 5%. But he still missed an opportunity. I love the outro music, Bob. What a great selection by me. It sounds much better in practice than it did when I was picking the music. Kyler Murray's 5% is going to grow if week over week he continues to have these issues and continues to doesn't lift up his teammates. That's all he has to do. He's got a good supporting cast, a decent supporting cast. Allow those guys to shine.